I'll be discussing the readings from Cooper chapter 14, 15, 21, Johnston chapter 7, and Skinner chapter 9. In chapter 14, Cooper describes positive and negative punishment and how to implement punishment to decrease behavior. Cooper explained that just like with spontaneous recovery of a behavior, the same can happen when using punishment as an intervention, except it's called recovery from punishment. It normally occurs when the punishment has decreased or discontinued, and the individual realizes that the punishment has stopped. A punisher, something added or removed to decrease behavior, can be positive by adding a stimulus to decrease behavior, or negative by removing a stimulus to decrease behavior. Punishers can be unconditioned or not associated with a punisher but still viewed as negative, or conditioned and paired with a specific punisher to have a punishing effect. Punishment is most effective when used on a continuous schedule. Punishment has shown to be effective when used consistently and with the right amount of magnitude. The reinforcement for the alternative or appropriate behavior should mimic the reinforcement for the unwanted behavior. The fact that punishment paired with reinforcement of alternative behaviors increases results observed seems to be an important statement that Cooper wanted to get across, as he mentioned it several times in this chapter. Some examples of positive punishment include reprimanding, response blocking, contingent exercise, and overcorrection. Reprimands can include saying, "No, sit down, don't do that." Reprimands can be effective, but are more likely to be effective if paired with a nonverbal or gestural cue, such as a firm hand on the shoulder. Response blocking is when you physically intervene immediately. You are blocking the behavior from occurring once it has been initiated, such as thumb sucking. Contingent exercise is physical activity used as punishment. For example, in the military, push-ups are often a contingent exercise and used to punish the individual after an incorrect or inappropriate behavior. Overcorrection is when you use an extreme punishment. There are two types of overcorrection: restitutional and positive practice overcorrection. Restitutional overcorrection would be you requiring an individual to pick up the toys that he or she dumped out when they were angry. It includes the individual repairing or fixing something that was caused by the problem behavior. Positive practice includes you enforcing the individual to redo the action or the behavior correctly. For example, if a student is running in the hall, you might have him or her go back to where he or she started and walk back several times. The student is practicing the correct behavior. There can be some side effects or problems when using punishment. Sometimes spanking or using physical punishment can model inappropriate behavior to the individual, as well as trigger aggression from the individual. Sometimes an individual may attempt to avoid or escape the punishment, such as lying or cheating. Behavioral contrast is also something that can occur, and this is when an individual is punished for behavior in one occasion or an environment, but not in any other environments. The behavior is decreased in the environment that is punished, but the behavior continues in the environments which are not punished. A good example of this is a student behaving in one class but misbehaving in another class. Spontaneous recovery can also occur. Sometimes a behavior will come back if punishment stops. This can lead to the behavior coming back at a lower rate in the beginning, but can lead to a more severe rate than what the behavior was originally. In chapter 15, Cooper defines negative punishment as the removal of a stimulus that is positively reinforcing the behavior. Timeout is a good example of negative punishment. Timeout is when an individual is not provided an opportunity to receive positive reinforcement. Sometimes they remain in the same environment, and sometimes they are removed from the reinforcing environment. These are known as non-exclusionary timeout, and then exclusionary timeout, respectively. Response cost is another type of negative punishment mentioned on our instructor's video. Response cost is when you take or remove the reinforcing item from the individual. There are 4 types of non-exclusionary timeout. Planned ignoring is when you purposefully try to stop positive reinforcement from occurring, such as giving attention. At times when a child is misbehaving with a toy, what do? You take the toy away by removing the toy that was positively reinforcing the child. Something called contingent observation is another type of timeout in which you have the individual stop participating in an activity that is reinforcing and observe the other individuals who are participating. A good example of this could be misbehavior during a sports game and being benched by the coach and told to watch the other classmates do it correctly. There is also a timeout ribbon that you can use, which stays on the child's wrist or pinned on the shirt during appropriate behavior. When they start engaging in inappropriate behavior, the ribbon is removed, signaling to others to remove access to positively reinforcing items, which is their attention. There are 3 types of exclusionary timeout. Teachers often use a hallway timeout to speak to a student about his or her behavior or to give him or her a minute to gather themselves. This should be cautioned because if a student is unattended, they could receive positive reinforcement from passing students in the hallway, or they could be a flight risk to escape or avoid the punishment. A timeout room can also be used, but this must be a safe place. At the middle school I worked at, we previously had a timeout room which was called the choice room. If a student kept misbehaving in class, the child was written up on a choice referral and sent to the choice room for the remainder of that period. The child would reflect on his or her behavior and complete their classwork. A partition timeout could be another method used in the classroom by separating a student who is misbehaving by using some type of divider or possibly one of the science experiment boards set up on a table or a desk. This separates the child from the view of the other students and removes positive reinforcers such as attention. In Chapter 21, Cooper describes extinction. Extinction is when a behavior that has been reinforced stops being reinforced on purpose to get the behavior to decrease. An example could be trying to get a child to stop the behavior of crying. You will ignore or not provide attention to the behavior, and eventually the behavior should stop. There is a little more to it than just ignoring. You need to be prepared for what is called an extinction burst. This is when the child who was being ignored heightens their crying or level of screaming. The behavior will always get worse before it gets better. Once the child finally makes the connection that they are no longer going to get what they want by crying, the behavior should stop. I would also recommend teaching and reinforcing an alternative or an appropriate behavior to replace the crying. Extinction could have been reinforced by positive stimuli, negative stimuli, or automatic stimuli. If a child constantly yells out in class and this behavior has been reinforced by the teacher by responding to him or her, then the behavior has been maintained by positive reinforcement. In order to get rid of this behavior, the teacher will have to ignore or put the behavior on extinction to diminish it. Sometimes in schools, students are reinforced by previously being allowed to escape a task. For example, work that is too difficult. The behavior has been negatively reinforced by removing the aversive stimulus of difficult work. In order to correct this behavior, the teacher would have to make sure the student could not get by without doing the work. This could include teaching the student to ask for help, teaching the student to ask for a break when frustrated, you as the teacher providing prompts or reinforcement for completion of work. This would be known as escape extinction because you are not allowing the child to escape the task of completing work. Sometimes behaviors are reinforced by automatic stimuli or something that produces a positive effect to our senses. Some examples that Cooper gave are flipping a light switch repeatedly, which would be a visual stimulation, or hair twirling or pulling, sometimes scratching of the skin. For these behaviors to be corrected, the stimuli that are positively reinforcing to the individual need to be removed so that there is no access to that positive reinforcement. In Johnston chapter 7, he describes behavior as creative when it is something that we're not used to, we haven't seen it before, or if it's outside of our cultural norm. Johnston continues to describe the controversy of labeling behavior creative. He explains that this may not be the best theory because our minds recognize what is unfamiliar to us, causing us to label an unfamiliar behavior as creative. He discusses how culture and circumstances can affect our behavior. This is because of how we base our behavior on the others around us, on the specific environment we are in, or what we are introduced to or what we are taught. Sometimes we are quick to make the statement, "You knew better," when an individual truly may not have. This all depends on their environmental norms for behavior. Johnston also brings up how we are influenced to feel guilty or ashamed of our inappropriate or different behaviors. A lot of people have difficulty taking ownership or responsibility for their actions and blame others for their behavior, especially when the actions or behaviors are negative. On the other hand, we are quick to take credit for good behavior. Skinner chapter 9. Skinner's discussion related closely with Johnston's. Skinner suggested that we say that young children know how to do things like cry and suck to drink. Skinner argues that this supports that children don't possess knowledge, but that they possess behavior. Skinner discusses different types of knowing and how our previous experiences influence our behavior. He also explains how we think we should know what to do or how to do based on the previous experiences that we've been exposed to. He explains the difference in understanding and knowing, but refers to knowing as actually possessing information. Skinner also mentions how people use behavior to classify people, such as ethnicity or heritage. My discussion question is this. After watching the video Super Nanny Extinction for this module and reading about the types of punishment and extinction, what would you recommend trying first to diminish the screaming behavior of wanting to be cuddled to sleep? Would you recommend extinction to the nighttime cuddle me to sleep problem that this mom had? Or would you try to slowly wean the child from the cuddles by positively reinforcing the child for attempts at laying alone, then longer periods of time, and etc.? Your response is not limited to any one type of intervention. I'm just interested in your thoughts. Thank you.